Hey guys, in this video we're going to see if Red, the protagonist from the Gen 1 game, has a good or a bad team. Let's get right into it. I start off with my Pikachu, he starts off with a Bolt Down and one-shots me with a Psychic Fangs. I then go into my Venusaur, he goes for another Psychic Fangs, does a huge chunk, I hang on, retaliate with the Earthquake, take him out. He then decides to go into his Ferret, outspeeds me, goes for the U-turn, takes out my Venusaur. He pivots into his Clank. I then decide to go into my Charizard. I immediately start dancing with the dragons, get that boost, he goes for the Wild Charge, does a huge chunk, but I hang on. He takes some recoil, I then retaliate with the Earthquake, take out the Clank. He then decides to go into his Salamence, intimidates my Charizard, I go for the Thunder Punch, do about a quarter, he goes for the Dragon Pulse, takes out my Zard. I then decide to go into my Lapras, he decides to switch into a shiny Sylveon, I go for the Freeze Dry, do barely anything. I then decide to go for the Toxic, get some residual damage going, he starts calming his mind over there. He takes some poison damage, I then decide to go for the Whirlpool, trap the Sylveon here, he goes for the Hyper Voice, does about half to me. Gets that Throat Spray boost, I get some lefties, he takes some Toxic and Whirlpool damage. He then decides to fire off another Hyper Voice, Lapras just hangs on, fire off another Freeze Dry, does barely anything. Takes some more damage, I get some lefties back. I go for another Freeze Dry, take out the Sylveon. He then goes back into the Ferret, goes for the return, takes out my Lapras. I then decide to go into my Blastoise, he decides to switch into his Gengar, I go for the Shell Smash, get that boost, activate my White Herb, get rid of the drops, and then go for the Terra Ice Beam, knock him down to his Sash. He gets that Curse Body going, disables my Ice Beam, retaliates with the Energy Ball, does a good chunk to me. I then go for the Hydro Pump, take out the Gengar. He then goes back into his Ferret, I go for another Hydro Pump, one-shot the Ferret. He then goes into his last mon, the Salamence, intimidates my Blastoise, I whiff the Hydro Pump, he goes for the Flamethrower, does a huge chunk but Blastoise just hangs on. Disable goes away, he goes for the Terra Fire, I fire off an Ice Beam, he hangs on, goes for the Flamethrower, takes out my Blastoise. I then decide to go into my last mon, the Snorlax, he goes for the Flamethrower, does barely anything, I go for the Earthquake, take out the Salamence. Good game. At this point, I ask you guys to please like, comment, share, and subscribe as it really helps the channel. Without further ado, let's get into game 2. I start with my Blastoise, he starts with the Almaldo. I go for the Shell Smash, get that boost, he sets up the Sandstorm. I go for the Hydro Pump, take him out in one shot. He then goes into his Dracozolt, I go for the Ice Beam, take him out in one shot. I take some Sandstorm damage, he then goes into his Tyrantrum, go for the Hydro Pump, do about half, he goes for the Psychic Fangs, does a nice chunk, I take some more sand damage, go for the Ice Beam, take him out. I take some more damage from the sand, he then goes into his Cradily, goes for the Protect, I go for the Ice Beam, does nothing to him. I take some more damage, he then decides to switch into his Caracosta, I go for the Ice Beam, do about a quarter over there. He then decides to go back into the Cradily, I go for the Hydro Pump, he gets that Storm Drain boost. I then go for the Ice Beam, do a huge chunk, Cradily just hangs on, goes for the Giga Drain, finally takes out my Blastoise. I then decide to go into my Lapras, immediately switch back into the Charizard, he goes for the Protect, it fails, gets some leftovers, I go for the Earthquake, take out the Cradily. He then goes into his Caracosta, I go for the Terra Electric Thunder Punch, he hangs on, goes for the Shell Smash, gets his boost. Eats that herb, goes for the Rock Slide, one-shots my Charizard. I then decide to go into my Snorlax, he goes for the Terra Water, Liquidation, does a huge chunk, I just hang on, retaliate with the Earthquake. I get some lefties, he then goes into his last mon, the Aerodactyl, goes for the Mega Evolution, starts dancing with the dragons. I go for the Ice Punch, do a huge chunk, but he just hangs on. He goes for the Dual Wing Beat, takes out my Lax. I then go into my Pikachu, he goes for the Earthquake, takes out my Pikachu. I then decide to go into my Venusaur, he goes for the Dual Wing Beat, one-shots Venusaur. I then go into my last mon, he goes for the Dual Wing Beat, Lapras just hangs on, goes for the Freeze Dry, takes him out. Good game. Alrighty, let's get into the last game. I start off with my Venusaur, he starts off with the Aron. I whiff the Sleep Powder, he goes for the Endeavor, takes me all the way down to that red. I whiff another Sleep Powder, he then goes for the Iron Head but doesn't take out Venusaur. He then switches into a Staraptor, I finally connect with the Sleep Powder. He then decides to switch again, goes into the Blaziken, I switch and go into my Pikachu. I go for the Surf, one-shot the Blaziken. He then decides to go back into the Aaron. I go for the Surf, knock him all the way down to that Sturdy. He goes for the Endeavor, knocks me down to 1 HP. He activates that Custap Berry, and then takes me out with the Rock Tomb. I then decide to go into my Lapras, go for the Whirlpool, take out the Aaron. He then decides to go into the Staraptor. He's sleeping over there. I go for the Freeze Dry, do a little bit over half. He's still sleeping over there. I go for another Freeze Dry, take out the bird. He then decides to go into his Aerodactyl, goes for the Mega Evolution, whiffs the Stone Edge. I then go for the Freeze Dry, do a little bit over half, get the freeze. He's frozen over there. I go for another Freeze Dry, take out the Aerodactyl. He then goes into his Celesteela, goes for the Flame Charge, does a little bit, gets that speed boost. I go for the Perish Song, get my lefties back, and that Perish timer is ticking down for the both of us. He then switches into his Crawdon. I go for the Whirlpool, do barely anything but trap the Crawdon. I get some lefties, he takes some Whirlpool damage. I then decide to go for another Perish Song. He goes for the Crab Hammer, I absorb that. He takes a little bit more damage, that Perish timer is still going down. I then decide to switch into my Blastoise. He goes for another Crab Hammer, does a huge chunk, but Blastoise hangs on. He then decides to switch into his Celesteela. I go for the Hydro Pump, do a little bit over half. I then go for the Terra Ice, Ice Beam. Celesteela just hangs on. Goes for the Energy Ball, Blastoise just hangs on. He goes back into his Crawdon. I go for the Ice Beam, do about 30. He then goes for the Aqua Jet, and Blastoise goes down. I then go back into my Lapras. He goes back into the Celesteela. I go for the Freeze Dry, take out Celesteela. He then goes back into his last mon, the Crawdon, goes for the Terra Steel. I go for the Freeze Dry, do barely anything. He goes for the Metal Claw, does about half to my Lapras. I get some lefties back, go for the Freeze Dry, take out the Crawdon. Good game. Alrighty, and that wraps up the video. Please let me know what you guys think about Red Team down below and stay tuned for future content. Peace!